The afternoon sun, the color of melted honey, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the air. Amelia Thorne traced the rim of her chamomile teacup, the warmth a small comfort against the vast, cool marble of the kitchen island. From this height, the city was a silent, sprawling map of someone else's life. Her own life was here, within these soundproofed walls, a life of curated perfection she had once only dreamed of. A life with Ethan. Ethan Thorne. The name still sent a gentle flutter through her, even after 5 years of marriage. He was a titan in the world of finance, a man whose quietest whisper could send ripples through the stock market. To the world he was formidable, untouchable, a handsome fortress of ambition and intellect. But to her he was just Ethan. The man who hummed off-key while making coffee in the morning, who left his socks on the floor, who would gently place his hand on her burgeoning belly and speak to their unborn son as if he were already in the room. She was 26 weeks pregnant, and the reality of it was a constant, wondrous presence. The baby was a boy, and they had already named him Leo. His room was ready, a serene sanctuary of soft blues and creams, a miniature galaxy of stars painted on the ceiling. Her life felt complete, a perfect polished sphere. Lately, however, tiny hairline cracks had begun to appear on its surface. It started with the late nights at the office, which Ethan had always been prone to, but now they were more frequent, stretching into the skeletal hours of the early morning. He'd slip into bed, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, something sharp and floral, like night-blooming jasmine. He'd blame it on a new client, a woman from a Parisian firm, insisting the scent lingered in the conference rooms. Amelia, wanting to believe him, had accepted the explanation. Then there were the phone calls. He'd take them in his study, the heavy oak door clicking shut, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur. Once she had walked past and heard a laugh, not his deep, rumbling laugh she loved, but a higher musical peal. When she'd asked who it was, he'd simply said, "Just a colleague, Chloe. She's enthusiastic." Chloe Vance. The name was new, a rising star in his company's acquisitions department, according to the one time Amelia had pressed him for details. He'd described her as brilliant, ruthless, a necessary asset. Amelia had seen her picture once in an online feature about Thorne Industries' new power players. Chloe was stunning, with sharp fox-like features, a cascade of raven-black hair, and eyes that seemed to burn with a fierce predatory intelligence. She was everything Amelia wasn't. Amelia was soft, gentle, her world centered on home and heart. Chloe looked like she was made to conquer boardrooms and break men. The unease was a small, cold stone in Amelia's gut, a feeling she tried to push away. She was pregnant, hormonal. Her insecurities were running wild. Ethan loved her. He was building a family with her. He wouldn't risk that. He couldn't. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from her friend, Jessica. "You will not believe who I just saw at Aurelia. Your hubby. And he is not alone. Aurelia, the impossibly exclusive restaurant where you had to book months in advance." Ethan had tried to get them a table for their anniversary and failed. A second message arrived, a picture this time. The quality was grainy, taken from across a crowded room, but there was no mistaking it. Ethan, seated at a secluded corner booth, leaning in close to another person, and that person was Chloe Vance. Her scarlet-painted lips were curved in a triumphant smile, her hand resting possessively on Ethan's arm. They weren't just colleagues having a business lunch. The intimacy was palpable, a crackle of electricity visible even in the blurry photo. The polished sphere of Amelia's life didn't just crack, it shattered. The teacup slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed the breaking of her own heart. The hot tea splashed across her feet, but she barely felt the sting. All she could see was that picture. All she could feel was the icy certainty that her perfect life had been a perfect lie. The drive to Aurelia was a blur of traffic lights and the frantic thumping of her own heart against her ribs. Amelia didn't have a plan. She was operating on pure, raw instinct, a primal need to see it with her own eyes, to force the lie out into the open where it couldn't hide in the shadows of her doubts anymore. She clutched the steering wheel of her Range Rover, her knuckles white, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. She kept one hand protectively on her belly, a reflexive gesture. Leo. I have to protect Leo. The valet at Aurelia looked at her with a mixture of surprise and pity. Her hair was a mess, she hadn't changed out of her simple maternity dress, and her eyes were red-rimmed and wild. She probably looked like a madwoman. I'm Amelia Thorne, she said, her voice trembling but firm. My husband is inside. The name Thorne was a key that unlocked any door. The valet nodded wordlessly, and the maître d' appeared as if summoned, his professional smile faltering slightly as he took in her state. Mrs. Thorne, what a surprise. Mr. Thorne did not mention he was expecting you. I'm sure he didn't, Amelia said, her voice dripping with an acid she didn't know she possessed. Which table? He hesitated, his eyes darting around the opulent gold-leafed dining room. Perhaps you'd like to wait in the lounge. I can inform Mr. Thorne. Now, she commanded, the single word sharp as a shard of glass. Defeated, he led her through the maze of tables where conversations hushed and heads turned. They were a spectacle, the frantic, pregnant wife and the flustered maître d'. And then she saw them. They were in the most secluded booth, nestled in a velvet-lined alcove. Chloe was laughing, throwing her head back, the diamonds on her ears catching the light. Ethan was watching her, a small, unreadable smile on his face. He looked relaxed, younger, stripped of the corporate armor he usually wore. The sight was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. This was not a business meeting. This was an escape from her. Amelia walked the last few feet on legs that felt like they were made of sand. She stopped at their table. The laughter died on Chloe's lips. Her eyes widened, first in shock, then in a flicker of something else. Annoyance. Contempt. Ethan looked up. His face, for a split second, was a mask of cold surprise. There was no guilt, no panic, just a chilling stillness. It was the face of a stranger. Amelia, he said, his voice dangerously calm, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? She repeated, her voice breaking. What are you doing here, Ethan? Having an enthusiastic business meeting? Chloe let out a small, condescending scoff. Darling, you should have called first. This is dreadfully awkward for everyone. She looked Amelia up and down, her gaze lingering on the swell of her stomach with undisguised disdain. You look a mess. The insult barely registered. Amelia's focus was entirely on Ethan. Tell me it's not true, she whispered, her plea hanging in the suddenly silent air of the restaurant. Look at me and tell me this is all just a misunderstanding. Ethan didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his grey eyes like chips of granite. His silence was the answer, more damning than any confession. It was real. All of it. The late nights, the perfume, the hushed phone calls. It was all real. Tears streamed down Amelia's face, hot and furious. How could you? She choked out. How could you do this to me? To us? To our son? Chloe finally pushed her chair back and stood up, a sleek predator ready to strike. Oh, please, don't be so melodramatic. Men get bored, especially with this. She gestured vaguely at Amelia's pregnant form. It's hardly attractive, is it? He needs a woman, not a vessel. The cruelty of the words was staggering. Amelia felt a surge of white-hot rage, an instinct to protect her child from this venom. You stay away from my family, she snarled, taking a step forward. Or what? Chloe challenged, her voice low and menacing. She took a step to meet Amelia, her expensive heels clicking on the polished floor. You'll cry on me? Face it, you've lost. He's with me now. He wants me. He wants a partner, an equal, not some little homemaker waiting by the door. He is my husband, Amelia cried out, her voice raw. A temporary arrangement, Chloe said with a dismissive wave of her hand. She moved closer, invading Amelia's personal space, her sharp jasmine perfume choking the air. Now, I suggest you run along home before you embarrass yourself any further. Amelia stood her ground, trembling but resolute. I'm not going anywhere. A flash of fury crossed Chloe's face. The pretense of civility vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated malice. What happened next was a blur of motion, too fast to comprehend. Chloe's leg shot out, the pointed toe of her designer shoe connected squarely with Amelia's abdomen. It wasn't a gentle push, it was a kick. A deliberate, vicious kick aimed directly at the precious life she was carrying. A collective gasp went through the restaurant. A waitress dropped a tray of glasses, the sound shattering the tense silence. Amelia cried out, a sound of pure agony and terror, as a blinding, searing pain exploded through her belly. She staggered backward, her hands flying to cradle her stomach, her knees buckling. Through a haze of pain, her eyes found Ethan's. He was already moving, but not in the way she expected. He hadn't lunged at Chloe, he hadn't screamed. His face was a terrifying, frozen mask of absolute calm. He caught Amelia as she fell, his arms like steel bands around her, preventing her from hitting the floor. He held her close, his head bent down to hers. His lips were by her ear, and as the world began to spin into darkness, she heard him whisper. The words a thread of ice in the chaos. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice devoid of all emotion. "I was waiting for a reason to destroy her. She just gave it to me." The world swam back into focus in a haze of antiseptic white. The rhythmic beeping of a machine was a steady metronome counting out her heartbeats. Amelia's first conscious thought was of the pain, a deep, cramping ache in her abdomen that was terrifyingly real. Her second thought was of Leo. She tried to sit up, a strangled cry escaping her lips. A nurse with a kind, weary face gently pushed her back down. "Easy now, Mrs. Thorne. You're at St. Catherine's Hospital. You took a nasty fall." A fall. They were calling it a fall. "My baby," Amelia rasped, her throat raw. "Is my baby okay?" The nurse's smile was reassuring. "The doctor will be in to speak with you shortly, but the fetal heartbeat is strong. You're having some contractions, which is concerning, so we're keeping you for observation. But for now, both you and the little one are stable." Relief washed over her so intensely it felt like a second wave of pain. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of gratitude this time. Leo was okay. He was a fighter. The door opened and Ethan walked in. He looked immaculate, his suit uncreased, his hair perfectly in place. If it weren't for the grim set of his jaw, he could have been walking into a boardroom. He came to her bedside, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," she whispered, the memory of the restaurant, of Chloe's sneer, of the brutal kick crashing back down on her. The relief she'd felt moments ago curdled into confusion and betrayal. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low and even. "How am I feeling?" She stared at him, incredulous. Your mistress kicked me, Ethan. She kicked our baby, and you just stood there." "I didn't just stand there, Amelia. I caught you," he corrected her, his tone maddeningly calm. "And I got you here." "And her? Chloe, did you take her home? Did you comfort her after such a stressful afternoon?" The sarcasm was bitter on her tongue. He pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "Chloe is no longer your concern. She is no longer anyone's concern." Amelia shook her head, a fog of exhaustion and emotional pain clouding her thoughts. "What does that even mean? Are you breaking up with her? Is that supposed to make me feel better? You cheated on me, Ethan. You let this happen." "I did," he said, and the simple admission was more shocking than any denial would have been. "I am not going to stand here and tell you I am blameless in this. I made a grave error in judgment. I allowed a viper into our lives, but I need you to listen to me very carefully." He leaned closer, and the intensity in his gaze was something she had only ever seen him use in high-stakes negotiations. "I have known about Chloe's true nature for months. I knew she was ambitious to the point of sociopathy. I knew she was manipulative. I suspected she was leaking information to our biggest competitor, Sterling Cole." Amelia stared at him, bewildered. "You knew? You knew, and you were with her." "With her is a strong term," he said, a flicker of distaste crossing his features. "I was allowing her to think she had me. I was feeding her carefully selected, misleading information, tracking her communications, building a case. She was a pawn in a much larger game, Amelia, a game to expose a corporate espionage ring that went all the way to the top of Sterling Cole. It was a necessary evil to protect the company, to protect everything I've built for us." The words were a torrent, a complex explanation that her tired mind struggled to grasp. A spy. A larger game. It sounded like something from a movie, not her life. So the affair, it was fake? She asked, a desperate sliver of hope piercing through her anger. Ethan's gaze dropped for a fraction of a second. The intimacy was, he said quietly. The emotional toll on you was not. That is the part I cannot excuse. I let it get too far. I underestimated her possessiveness. I misjudged the risk. I was arrogant, and I put you and Leo in the path of that risk. That is my failure, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you let me. He looked back up at her, his eyes filled with a chilling resolve. But I told you the truth when you were falling. I was waiting. I needed a reason, an undeniable, public, and catastrophic reason to remove her. If I had simply fired her, she would have played the victim, the scorned lover of a powerful billionaire. She could have sued, written a book, dragged our name through the mud for years. I needed something that would utterly and completely discredit her. Something that would turn public opinion so violently against her that she could never recover. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. When she kicked you, Amelia, when she put her foot on our son, she handed me that reason on a silver platter. She committed a violent public assault on a pregnant woman, in front of a room full of witnesses, in front of me. She ceased to be a disgruntled mistress and became a criminal. She gave me the justification to unleash the full force of my resources against her without any legal or public blowback. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers cool and firm around hers. The moment we left that restaurant, I made one phone call. Not to a lawyer. To a man named Marcus Vance. Vance, Amelia repeated, confused. Like her last name. Her father, Ethan confirmed, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a cold, predatory gleam in his eyes. Marcus Vance is the CEO of Sterling Coal, the man she was feeding information to, the man who orchestrated this entire scheme to get his daughter inside my company and my life, the man who is about to find out that his daughter's little stunt just cost him his entire empire. The news reports over the next few days were a brutal, relentless storm. Ethan's name was a thunderclap. The Vances a cautionary tale whispered on every news channel. The story had everything. Sex, betrayal, corporate espionage, and a shocking act of violence against a pregnant woman. It was a national obsession. When Ethan finally brought Amelia home, the penthouse felt alien. It was no longer a sanctuary, but a gilded cage where she had been kept in the dark. The silence between them was a chasm filled with unspoken accusations and the ghosts of the past few months. He was a stranger to her now, a man of terrifying depths and chilling calculations. She looked at the man who hummed off-key and left his socks on the floor and could no longer reconcile him with the grandmaster who moved people like chess pieces. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, she found him in his study, the room she'd come to dread. He wasn't at his desk. He stood before the mahogany wall, a silhouette against the city lights, his expression grim. "I need to see it," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Not the news reports, not the headlines. I need to see what you did. I need to understand the man I married." He met her gaze, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then a weary resignation. He pressed an invisible panel, and a section of the bookshelf slid away with a soft hiss, revealing a hidden door. Behind it was not an office, but a command center. Banks of monitors glowed with data streams and communication logs, the low hum of cooling fans a constant presence. A large screen in the center showed a complex web of connections, linking Chloe and Marcus Vance to offshore accounts and shell corporations. It was the cold, digital heart of his secret war. "My God, Ethan," she whispered, one hand going to her belly. "This is where I fought them," he said, his voice low. He pointed to a timeline on one screen. "Here, 6 months ago. This is when I first suspected. An algorithm my team developed flagged a pattern in her data access. She was too curious about projects far outside her department, projects that subsequently stalled due to unforeseen market shifts. Too many coincidences." He moved to another screen, which displayed audio waveforms. "Here is when we confirmed the connection to her father. An encrypted call from a burner phone. She was sloppy. Thought the encryption was military grade. We broke it in 3 days. That's her telling Marcus about a potential acquisition in Asia. an acquisition I invented 2 days prior. He walked her through months of his life that had been a complete blank to her. The late nights weren't just meetings, they were counterintelligence operations. The hushed phone calls weren't with a lover, they were with his security chief, planning the next piece of bait. He showed her the doctored financial reports he'd let her steal from his laptop, data that led Sterling Cole into a disastrous investment in a German tech firm that was secretly bankrupt. He had built an elaborate prison of misinformation around Chloe, all while she thought she was winning. I was her greatest success, Ethan said, his voice flat. That was her weakness, her ego. She couldn't believe a man like me could be so thoroughly seduced. So she never questioned it. I let her see what she wanted to see. A powerful man, bored with his domestic life, ripe for the picking. The words were a dagger in Amelia's heart. So you acted the part. It wasn't a question. I did, he admitted, refusing to look at her. Then he stopped at a final screen, this one displaying a dossier complete with surveillance photos. One showed Amelia leaving her prenatal yoga class, a telephoto lens capturing her laughing with another expectant mother. And this is why the game had to end, he said, his voice tight. 2 weeks ago, Chloe hired a private investigator. She wasn't just after my company anymore, Amelia. She was studying you. Amelia's blood ran cold. The image on the screen was a violation, a predatory eye invading the most peaceful moments of her life. I needed you to confront us, he continued, his voice raw with desperation. I had to end it before she escalated, before she decided you were an obstacle to be removed more permanently. It was a monstrous choice. I aimed you like a weapon because I knew she would react, but I swear to you I never imagined she would get violent. Not like that. But she did, Ethan. Amelia's voice rose, cracking with anguish. This isn't protection, this is puppetry. You moved all the pieces, me, Jessica, Chloe, around your secret little board, and you never stopped to think that one of the pieces might get broken. Your arrogance nearly cost us our son. She turned and fled the room, the glowing screens of his secret life burning an imprint on her memory as she slammed the hidden door shut, the hiss of its closing like a final damning whisper. The next day, Amelia met Jessica for coffee. The air between them was thick with unspoken things. Finally, Amelia put her cup down. He showed me everything, the room, the surveillance photos. He told me he used you. Jessica's face, usually so open, became a mask. She took a deep breath. He's not telling you the whole truth, Amy. He didn't use me. I volunteered. Amelia stared at her, speechless. He came to me a month ago, Jessica continued, her voice low and urgent. He was a wreck. He showed me the PI reports, photos of you at the market, at your doctor's office, a list of your appointments. He was terrified, Amy, not for his company but for you. He knew she was unstable, and he was afraid of what she would do when she realized she was losing. He didn't ask me to trick you. He asked me to watch over you, to be his eyes when he couldn't. So the message? That was my idea, Jessica admitted, her eyes pleading for understanding. I saw what his secrecy was doing to you. You were a ghost in your own home. I told him, this has to end, Ethan. Now. He wanted to wait, to gather more evidence against her father. I told him no. I told him your sanity was more important than his corporate war. I knew you wouldn't listen to him, but you would listen to me. I sent that text because I knew it was the only way to force a confrontation, to bring the whole rotten thing crashing down before she could do something worse. Another layer of the lie peeled away, revealing a truth that was even more complicated. Her friend hadn't betrayed her. She had made a calculated, ruthless choice, just like Ethan. She had chosen to wound Amelia in order to save her. You should have told me, Amelia whispered. And what would you have done? Jessica challenged gently. Played along. Pretended not to know your husband was faking an affair. You couldn't have done it, Amy. It's not who you are. We did what we had to do to protect you and Leo. It was ugly and it hurt you, and for that I am so sorry. But I am not sorry we stopped her. The day of Chloe Vance's sentencing was a media spectacle. As Amelia and Ethan entered the packed courtroom, a hush fell, broken by the frantic storm of camera flashes. Ethan's hand was a firm, steady presence on the small of her back, a silent anchor. Amelia held her head high, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, feeling not like a victim, but like a survivor surveying a battlefield. Chloe sat at the defendant's table, a hollowed-out version of the woman from the restaurant. Her expensive clothes were replaced by a drab, ill-fitting suit. Her raven hair was pulled back severely, revealing the sharp, gaunt lines of her face. In the front row of the gallery sat her father, Marcus Vance, his face a grey mask of ruin, a fallen king forced to witness the final, pathetic act of his dynasty. His company was in receivership, his reputation shattered. He looked a decade older, a man consumed by the consequences of his own ambition. The most damning piece of evidence was an audio recording. Chloe's voice, sharp and arrogant, filled the silent courtroom. It was a call with her father from a month prior. "She's just so soft," Chloe's recorded voice sneered. The perfect little homemaker, honestly getting rid of the problem would be doing him a favor. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Marcus Vance flinched as if struck, his public humiliation complete. Amelia felt Ethan's hand tighten on her back, a small, protective gesture. When Chloe stood to give her statement, she didn't look at the judge. Her gaze, dull and lifeless, found Amelia's across the crowded room. "I was arrogant," she said, her voice a reedy whisper that barely carried. "I believed I was smarter, more deserving. I saw Mrs. Thorne's life, and I wanted it. I thought I could take it." A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. "He let me think I was his equal. He talked about the future, about a life beyond his current obligations." Her eyes flickered towards Amelia with a trace of the old venom. But he was playing a different game. He used my ambition as a weapon against me. He fed my ego, let me think I was winning. All while he was digging my grave. The information I passed to my father, it wasn't just wrong, it was poison. Every tip, every piece of intel was a carefully crafted lie designed to ruin us. And I delivered it to my own father with a triumphant smile. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Amelia's swollen belly. What I did was evil. I saw her standing there, with his child, with the life that should have been mine. And in that moment, I hated her. I wanted to erase them. I attacked a mother and her child out of spite. There is no excuse. I accept whatever punishment the court gives. I only hope that your son is born safe, and that he never has to know a world with people like me in it." She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in a state penitentiary. As she was led away in handcuffs, her father didn't even look at her. He just stared straight ahead, a man utterly destroyed. The karma was absolute, public, and devastating. A month later, Leo Thorne was born. He arrived in a flurry of chaos and joy, a healthy, screaming baby with a shock of dark hair and Ethan's serious grey eyes. When the nurse placed him in Amelia's arms, the world, the betrayals, the lies, the secret wars, all of it dissolved into an insignificant hum. All that mattered was the tiny, warm, perfect life she held. Ethan stood beside her, his face stripped bare of its usual armor, revealing a raw, profound awe. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he reached out a trembling finger to touch Leo's hand. The baby's fingers instinctively curled around his. He looked from his son to his wife, his eyes begging for something she wasn't yet sure she could give. "I will spend the rest of my life fixing what I broke, Amelia," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. She looked down at their son, a perfect, innocent being born from a storm of deceit. Then she looked back at her husband, the brilliant, dangerous, broken man she loved. The scar of his betrayal would always be there, a faint, silvery line on the surface of their marriage. But Leo was a new chapter. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding, resonating with a newfound strength in the sterile hospital room. "We will fix it, together. But the rules have changed. There are no more secret rooms. You will not protect me by lying to me. I am not a queen in a tower to be shielded from the dragon. We are partners. If there is a monster at the gate, you bring me to the gate with you. We face it together, or we fall together. I will not be a protected piece in your game. I am a player, or I am nothing." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as something to be cherished and shielded, but as an equal force. He saw not the woman he had tried to shield, but the woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, forged into steel. He nodded slowly. No more locked doors. Ever, he promised, the words a vow. He pulled out his phone, typed for a moment, and her own phone buzzed. A notification: Ethan Thorne has shared server access. Project Chimera. Full access, the key to his kingdom. The months that followed were a fragile, tense armistice. Trust was not a switch to be flipped. It was a structure to be rebuilt, brick by painful brick. The command center was dismantled from the hidden study and reassembled, smaller and more integrated, into a sleek workstation in their main living area. Its screens were dark unless they were both present. Amelia's education was a baptism by fire. She devoured everything, the nights once spent in anxious waiting, now filled with the blue glow of screens displaying geopolitical analyses and emerging market reports. She learned the language of his world, not as a spectator, but as an apprentice. She found a part of her mind, long dormant, that thrilled at the intricate dance of cause and effect, of power and consequence. One evening, while Leo slept soundly in his bassinet, she was tracing the supply chain logistics for a new Thorne Industries subsidiary in Southeast Asia. Ethan was on a call, his voice a low murmur from the other side of the room. Amelia's brow furrowed. She pulled up the subsidiary's charter, then cross-referenced it with local property laws and shipping lane regulations. A cold knot formed in her stomach. When Ethan finished his call, she didn't look up from her tablet. "The Port Authority in Kalimantan," she said, her voice even. "The new chairman is the brother-in-law of Senator Rashid, the man who's been blocking our land acquisition permits for 6 months." Ethan stopped, turning to face her. "We know. My team is working on a back channel to—" "You're trying to bribe the senator," Amelia interrupted, finally looking at him. "But you're bribing the wrong man. Rashid is just a figurehead. He doesn't control the port. The chairman does. And according to these articles of incorporation, the chairman's wife owns a majority stake in a local freight company. A company that is on the verge of bankruptcy." She spun the tablet around to face him. "You're offering the senator cash. He doesn't need cash. You should be offering his brother-in-law's freight company an exclusive 10-year logistics contract. It's cheaper, it's legal, and it makes them a partner, not a target. You're thinking like a hammer, Ethan. But this isn't a nail. It's a web." Silence stretched between them. Ethan walked over and took the tablet, his eyes scanning the data she had compiled. He saw the connections she had made, the human element he and his team of analysts had missed. He had seen the political obstacle. She had seen the family, the pride, the financial desperation that truly drove them. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a look of pure, unadulterated respect. "My God," he breathed, "you're right." That night was the turning point. She was no longer just his wife with access. She was his partner, his queen. 6 months later, they were at the museum gala, an event teeming with the city's financial predators. Amelia, in a sapphire gown that matched the cool confidence in her eyes, moved through the crowd with an effortless grace that was entirely new. She wasn't just Ethan Thorne's beautiful wife anymore. She was a presence in her own right. Her quiet observations and sharp questions earning her nods of respect from men who had once dismissed her. Across the marble hall she saw him. Marcus Vance. He looked diminished, but a flicker of the old arrogance remained. He was surrounded by a small group of investors, his voice animated, his hands gesturing with a confidence he no longer had the right to. "He has a certain resilience," Ethan murmured, appearing at her side with a glass of champagne for himself and sparkling water for her. "Like a cockroach." Before Amelia could reply, the cockroach in question spotted them and began to move through the crowd, a shark sensing blood. He arrived with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ethan and Amelia," Marcus said, his gaze lingering on her with a condescending pity. "So good to see you out. I trust you're recovering well? Such a messy affair." "We're perfectly fine, Marcus," Amelia replied, her voice as cool and smooth as the marble floor. "Though I hear the same can't be said for your portfolio." His smile tightened. "Bumps in the road. Every empire has them. In fact, I'm on the verge of a rather significant comeback. Reacquiring the last of Sterling Coal's core assets. A bit of poetic justice, don't you think?" Buying back my legacy from the ashes. Legacy is a heavy thing to carry, Amelia said, taking a deliberate sip of her water. It's so easy to drop. Marcus laughed, a short barking sound. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. This is a game for kings, not, well, you know. He gave her a dismissive once-over. Enjoy the canapes. He turned and walked away, rejoining his circle, leaving the stench of his arrogance in the air. Ethan's jaw was tight with fury. The nerve of that man. Amelia didn't take her eyes off Marcus. Let him, she said, her voice a low hum of compressed energy. He's not a king, Ethan. He's a narcissist. His greatest weakness isn't his balance sheet, it's his pride. He's not buying back an asset, he's trying to buy back his name. He will over-leverage himself to do it because, for him, it's not business, it's personal. She turned to Ethan, her eyes blazing with a cold fire he had come to recognize. So we let him win the bid. We'll even have one of our shell corporations quietly ensure his financing goes through at an exorbitant rate. We let him have his moment of triumph. We let him stand in the spotlight and feel like a king again. And then, Ethan prompted, a dangerous glint in his eye that now mirrored her own. And then, Amelia said, a razor-thin smile touching her lips, we use his pride to bankrupt him twice. The boutique bank underwriting his loan, Argent Capital, is dangerously overexposed in the commodities market, specifically cobalt. Tomorrow morning, a deeply researched story will appear on a respected industry blog. It will detail a breakthrough in synthetic alternatives, developed in a Swiss lab we secretly funded 6 months ago. The market will panic. Argent will panic. They'll call his debt and he won't have a prayer of covering it. He'll lose his company, his money, and the last shred of his reputation all at once. It won't be a battle. It will be an execution. Ethan looked at her, his love and respect for her shining in his eyes, brighter than it ever had before. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss not of apology, but of alliance. It wasn't the life she had once dreamed of, polished and flawless. It was a life of shadows and strategy, of shared risk and shared power. Amelia excused herself and found a quiet alcove overlooking the museum's sculpture garden. She pulled out her phone. With a few taps on an encrypted app, she authorized the final sequence. Execute Chimera variant Cobalt, 0800 Zurich time. The trap was sprung. They watched from a distance as the evening wore on. The first ripples began just after 10 p.m. A phone buzzed. An investor's face went pale as he read a notification. He whispered urgently to his neighbor. Soon, a dozen phones were out, the low murmur of the party shifting from polite gossip to panicked speculation. Marcus Vance's triumphant smile faltered. He saw the looks, the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. He pulled out his own phone, his thumb swiping frantically. His face, flushed with victory moments before, turned to a mask of grey dread. The investors who had been fawning over him began to melt away, avoiding his gaze, suddenly finding fascinating conversations on the other side of the room. He was a leper in a tuxedo. He knew instinctively that the axe had fallen, even if he didn't yet know who had swung it. He looked around wildly, his gaze finally landing on Amelia and Ethan, standing together, watching him. In that moment of eye contact, he understood. It was them. The karma was not just a headline this time, it was a public spectacle, and he was the star. As they were leaving, their coats retrieved, a figure blocked their path. It was Marcus, his face a mess of sweat and disbelief. You, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. This was you. The Cobalt story, it's a lie. Is it? Amelia asked calmly. The science is quite sound. Perhaps you should have diversified instead of betting your entire comeback on ego. You bitch, he spat, his composure cracking completely. You were nothing, a housewife, a decoration. He did this. He pointed a shaking finger at Ethan. Amelia stepped forward slightly, placing herself between Marcus and her husband. The movement was subtle but definitive. You're right about one thing, Marcus. I was a housewife. I spent my days creating a home, a sanctuary. I was focused on life. And you and your daughter, you brought a war to my door. You mistook my kindness for weakness. You saw a garden and thought it was undefended. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it cut through his rage like a shard of ice. You lost your empire the first time because you underestimated Ethan's loyalty. You lost it tonight because you underestimated my memory. You will never threaten my family again. Now, if you'll excuse us, my son's nanny is waiting. She walked past him without a backward glance, Ethan falling into step beside her. The sound of Marcus Vance's broken, impotent sob followed them out into the cool night air. Later, as their final encrypted email confirmed the complete collapse of Marcus's last venture, Amelia stood over Leo's crib. The moonlight cast a soft glow on his face. He was so perfect, so untouched by the darkness of the world they navigated. For a moment, a pang of guilt struck her. Was this the mother he deserved? A woman who plotted financial ruin as calmly as she planned his feeding schedule. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze following hers to their sleeping son. "Are we monsters, Ethan?" she whispered into the quiet of the room. He was silent for a long moment, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. "There are monsters in this world, Amelia," he finally said, his voice a low, certain murmur. "They prey on the soft, the gentle, the unsuspecting. They see kindness as weakness and trust as an opportunity. One of them put her foot on our son. We are not them." He tightened his hold, his lips brushing her temple. "We are the people who build the walls to keep the monsters out. And sometimes, to protect what's inside, we have to make the walls out of their bones." She leaned back against him, the warmth of his body a solid, reassuring presence. She looked at her son, then at the sprawling, indifferent city beyond the glass. Ethan was right, but his answer was incomplete. "No," she said softly, her voice gaining a steely resolve. "We are not the people who build the walls. We are the people who own the gate. We decide who comes in, who goes out, and who pays the toll. The world doesn't change. It will always have its monsters." She turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to cup his jaw. "But they will learn to fear us more than we fear them." It was a life that was real, messy, and dangerous. But it was theirs. And in this life, she was no longer the queen in the tower. She was the queen on the throne, with a sword in her hand. And the dragons were on notice.